All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we are putting a literary giant on the operating table. We're not treating Shakespeare's Macbeth like some dusty old play you had to read in school. No, we're looking at it as a chilling, step-by-step psychological autopsy of a mind in the process of completely and totally self-destructing.
And that really gets us to the heart of it all, doesn't it? What happens when a person's deepest, darkest ambitions are suddenly handed what feels like a supernatural permission slip? This is the core of the whole tragedy, that fatal intersection of prophecy, personal desire, and crucially, the free will to choose your own ruin.
So let's meet our patient, Macbeth. Now, here's the thing you have to remember. He doesn't start out as a monster. Far from it. He's a national hero, this celebrated warrior everyone looks up to. But inside all that nobility, there's a pre-existing condition, you could say. A fatal flaw, a really deep-seated ambition that makes him incredibly vulnerable to the psychological poison that's about to come his way.
Okay, so this is where the illness, the pathology, gets activated. The witch's prophecy isn't some command from fate that he has to follow. Think of it more like a psychological trigger. It doesn't plant evil thoughts in his head, it just gives a voice and what feels like cosmic approval to the dark thoughts that were already lurking in there. It's not destiny, it's an excuse.
And this brings us into a really key psychological concept here, magical thinking. This is the tool Macbeth uses to basically short-circuit his own conscience. He takes what the witches said and uses it to reframe regicide, killing a king. Suddenly, it's not this horrific soul-destroying crime anymore. No, it's just a necessary step to fulfill his destiny. It lets him push all that moral responsibility onto someone or something else.
And this whole process, it happens scary fast. The witches make their prediction, and almost immediately, part of it comes true when he's named Thane of Cawdor. That little bit of validation is psychologically devastating. It's like pouring gasoline on the fire of his magical thinking. And it leads him to make a very conscious, very deliberate choice, to toss his own morality aside and force the rest of that prophecy into reality.
But you know, this choice doesn't come easy. Not at all. Killing King Duncan is the absolute point of no return, and the lead up to it is this agonizing war inside his own head. Shakespeare makes it crystal clear that this isn't some act of blind fate. This is an act of psychological self-harm, and Macbeth is keenly, painfully aware of the damage he's about to do to his own soul.
And don't just take my word for it. These are Macbeth's own words. He knows with 100% certainty that this kind of violence will boomerang right back and destroy him. He gets the consequences perfectly, and yet he still does it. That conscious choice, going directly against his own better judgment, is what makes this so incredibly tragic.
His soul is basically under siege from two different directions. On the inside, you've got his conscience just screaming at him about the fallout. But on the outside, you have his wife, Lady Macbeth, who launches this just surgical psychological attack. She doesn't argue about morality. Nope, she goes right for the jugular. She attacks his identity, his manhood, telling him that being a man means taking what you want no matter the cost.
In her own psychological state, it's frankly terrifying. That famous moment where she asks the spirits to unsex me here, that is a conscious, deliberate attempt at what some scholars call the willed annihilation of conscience. She's actively trying to rip out her own humanity, her own empathy, to create this moral vacuum inside herself so she can see this thing through.
So the deed is done, and at this point the play completely shifts gears. It's not about the choice to do evil anymore. Now it's a clinical documentation of the mind's violent and totally inevitable reaction to that choice. The rest of the play is basically a medical chart of the symptoms of a soul tearing itself apart.
And the consequences are immediate, and they are all psychological. First, you get the hallucinations. That floating dagger is literally his guilt taking physical form. Then comes the paranoia, perfectly embodied by the ghost of Banquo that only he can see. And all of this just feeds a crippling anxiety, a mind he says is full of scorpions that drives him to commit more and more violence to feel safe.
Now, while Macbeth is unraveling for all the world to see, Lady Macbeth is completely collapsing in private. Her attempt to just switch off her conscience, it fails, spectacularly. This famous line, said while she's sleepwalking, shows her mind just breaking under the pressure of all that repressed guilt she thought she could just wish away.
I mean, think back to how confident she was right after the murder. A little water clears us of this deed. Well, that belief turns out to be a fatal, fatal delusion. Her compulsive hand-washing isn't just a quirk. It's a desperate, physical attempt to scrub away a spiritual stain. And it proves that you can't just wash guilt away. You have to face it.
And all of this, it leads to the terminal stage of his disease. After all the murder, the paranoia, the tyranny, what has Macbeth actually gained? Well, the pursuit of power hasn't led to fulfillment. It's led to a complete internal emptiness, a state of total psychological and moral death.
In his final moments, we see a complete psychological breakdown. He goes right back to the broken coping mechanism that started this whole mess in the first place, magical thinking. He desperately latches onto the witch's second batch of prophecies, believing these little loopholes make him invincible. It's one last pathetic attempt to escape the reality of his own choices before it all comes crashing down.
And this is the final diagnosis. This is where his entire journey has led him. The man who torched his honor, his peace of mind, his very soul, all for a crown, finally concludes that life itself is just a meaningless story. The ambition that drove him to do everything has left him with absolutely nothing but cosmic despair. That's the ultimate price. And so, Macbeth's story leaves us with a terrifying question. It's a timeless and brutal case study that really forces us to ask ourselves, what happens when we let our own ambitions start writing their own moral rules? It's a question about the dark potential that lies not in some prophecy from witches on a heath, but inside of us.